Alan, thank you. A voice from outer space. Yeah, we can continue that. And yours truly, being a backup and a very non-professional one at that. But thank you for the effort that the exhibitors have made and the judges. It is much appreciated. The batting sequence that we proposed for the evening, Frank will be showing the slides, and as best we can, we'll be commentating to them. With Gary Diffin, will go first on his entry, Novelty and Necessity. I'm just going to go run through this so people know the batting order. Ian Sadler next, the princely state of Jaipur. Harry Lower, but I will be presenting on behalf of Harry, and then Paula last. So that's the sequence that we've got. So I think the best thing we can do is kick this ball into play and ask Gary to start going through his exhibit. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks for that, John. Part of the thing that that I like about this is one, you can pretty much do whatever you want, and that's what this display lends itself to. And secondly, even though that where John says that we're not able to show it in the way that we'd like it, it involves our interstate and overseas fellows, and they can actually get to see what we display and exhibit and talk about when we have our annual competition. So there's pros and cons for both of it, but certainly I can see John's point of view. What this is something I thought of many years ago, to have something, it's having an exhibit which I know will never win any awards, but it's interesting in that it's novelty and necessity, and it's showing unusual items that have been delivered through the Colonial and Australian Postal Service. The reason I've broken up into novelty and necessity, because they're generally the two features that push forward to say, I'm going to send something unusual through the post. So, from if you look back in colonial times, most of the people wanted some of their items to stand out from the crowd and attract attention, particularly from the recipient. And so many unusual items were sent through. This is the advent of unusual entires, illustrated envelopes, advertising envelopes, and unusual items that they decided to send through the post. From a colonial perspective, the most unusual thing I've seen sent through the post was an oyster shell from Broome in Western Australia in about 1900 back to England. And it still had the stamps on it. It came up in an auction 20 years ago. And the thing is, even if I owned that item, I couldn't put it into a display like this. The second category for the unusual is necessity. And this stems from my following and collecting of Gallipoli. And necessity is the mother of all invention, and you'll see unusual items that were mostly developed on the Gallipoli front, and how they were sent home to people in Australia. So the first page is just an introduction, and the thing you see here is a diamond folded entire. It's unusual. I've only seen 3 of them, of which I own 2. But this is by far the earliest. And so it's very unusual for someone having an imperforate franking for something that's unusual that's gone through the post. Can we go to the next one, Frank, please? The next one is propaganda envelopes. Propaganda envelopes were, these are from the UK, mostly by Valentine, and there's probably about, I'd say 12 to probably closer to 15, because I've got about 12 of them. Propaganda envelopes sent from the Australian colonies, printed in England. Travellers brought them back out here, and they were promoting their points of view across penny postage. This particular one from South Australia is intoxicating drinks. We won't go there. I could spend a lot of time on intoxicating drinks. So that was propaganda envelopes, and these were unusual from the Australian colonies. The next one is down the base is a pen and ink illustrated envelopes, and these started to see the light of day in the 1870s, and they became much more popular at the turn of the century. They're relatively unusual from the Australian colonies. You used to see a lot more of these, particularly in England, so Ian Gregg would be aware of that. But they still are unusual from here. Can we go to the next one, please? The top one is a hand-painted illustrated envelope. The thing that's unusual about the top one is that it's a really early colour hand-painted envelope. This correspondence, there were 3 envelopes, and I'm still searching for the other 2. And the one at the base is it's a World War II era envelope, and used to see a lot of World War II soldiers when they were at their various theatres of war, particularly in New Guinea in the Middle East, and they would illustrate a whole correspondence sometimes and send them home. They're all hand-coloured. So you used to see a lot of these during World War II, but very few of them have survived. Can we go to the next one, Frank? The next one is hand-painted postcards, and these particularly came into their fore probably around the turn of the century. It's interesting to note that some of the postal administrations of the Australian colonies produced postal stationery or postcards purely for artists. They weren't very popular, they didn't sell all that well, but they kept the back of the postcards blank so artists could display it. And these are 2, quite very good examples of the artist's work on these particular cards. Can we go to the next one, Frank? These are unusual in that they're leather postcards. Leather postcards are probably more popular in the US than they were out here. So the top one's an inwards postcard from the US, and it was posted through the postal system. You can see that it's taxed, and the reason it was taxed because leather postcards were illegal. And the one at the bottom is from New South Wales. It didn't get taxed, and it was posted locally. Next one, Frank. This is getting to the more esoteric side of the unusual items posted. The top one is a playing card, and on the right-hand side you'll see a scanned image. It's the Joker, and I think the message is on the postcard is, I hope you know the Joker who has sent you this card, and I think that's really quite funny. It's the only playing card that I've seen posted from the Australian colonies. So I find this as one of the most unusual items. And certainly the lower one is half a shirt collar. Now, who in their right mind is going to send half a shirt collar from Sydney to Sweden? Now, there is some idiot out there that did this, and I am amazed that, one, it got sent. Secondly, it stayed intact, and you can see that that green label, and the green label at the base actually sealed the collar together, and it's got a message inside. And the thing is, someone's cut half a shirt collar up and sent it through the post. It's really nuts. But these are the sort of things that I like, and I think these are a promotion of what people can collect, or something that's unusual and picks people's minds. Frank, off to the next one. This probably, I call it maybe the second half, is more about necessity. And this necessity is, there were no paper or writing materials on the Gallipoli Peninsula in 1915. And so what started in about May and ended in probably mid-August, the soldiers were trying to find anything that they could to send back home. And probably the most common thing here is cutting up an ammunition box. So the ammunition box used to be like a small wooden crate, but the lining of the ammunition was in cardboard. So this is the lining of the ammunition, and it's been cut up and a message has been sent. So, and you can see those big black marks, 2/3 the way down, that it's also been censored as well. So And what's great about this one is that you look at the message, and the message says, this is positively the latest craze on the continent, homemade postcards. So it's a really great way to say, well, this is why we're doing it. And at the end of it, it says, I'm waiting for some writing paper from home. So this is right at the forefront of the reason that they're sending these unusual items is because there's no writing materials at Gallipoli. Can we go to the next one, please? You'll get to see a few of these. So it's the first one was an ammunition box. This one's a Nestle chocolate box, and you can make out where the Nestle box is. The thing I like about this one is that I've got two from this particular soldier, James Smith, and this is the one that he says, I received the letter from you and I haven't heard from you for 9 letters now. I don't know if it's basically saying, I don't know if you want to correspond with me. I don't know if you want to talk to me. And I still remember the time we held hands back in Sydney. So here's a soldier on the other side of the world writing on a Nestle milk box or chocolate box and hoping that his sweetheart back home writes back to him. I've tried to look this soldier up. I've tried to find out what happened to him, and I haven't been able to find out what the result was. So Dear Flo is still Dear Flo at the moment. Can we move next one? This is also from the same correspondence, and it's a Virginia cigarettes box. So what would have been in this particular box would be cigarette packets. And when we look at cigarette packets now, we look at there might be 30 or 40 in a cigarette packet. Back then there was 5, possibly 10, and that was their maximum that they had. And you'll get to see a little bit of that later. So the cigarette boxes or packets back then were so much smaller than what they are now. And they would have been contained in a box like this, which is where this postcards come from. The thing that's great about this is that this is the most famous postcard from Gallipoli. And down at the top right-hand corner, you'll see a hole in the postcard where a shrapnel pellet has just gone through it. And he writes about that in the message on the postcard. I can't make it out from the display here, Frank. So, but it's, I think it says just a few lines to let you know that all well in Banksia. I have not received any letter from you and I've only received one from home. I hope you'll excuse this card, but a shrapnel pellet has just gone through it. It's the most remarkable thing I've seen. Next one, please. This is a bit of an extension of the Gallipoli, and it's ledger paper and writing paper that were folded up to form entires like they used to do in the 1840s, 1850s, and sent back home to Australia. Next one. This is the Peninsula Press. So this was a newspaper that was printed by the Brits and with a lot of Australian content on Mudros, and sent to sent to Gallipoli on a daily basis. And this is one of these, and it was a sheet of paper. And these sheets of paper were actually pinned to the notice boards in particular battalions when they were fighting at the front. So someone's taken this Peninsula Press off the notice board and folded it up and sent it back home with a message. Next one. Getting back to cigarette boxes, this is a cigarette box. This held 5 cigarettes, and it was so small that the soldiers were sending these back home. And I've only actually recorded 4 of these. And so if you look at the size of the cigarette box, it's on the right hand side, and that's pretty much to scale. And then you open it up, and the soldiers address their note and their letter inside. All 4 of them have been addressed to South Australia, and all 4 of them are from pretty much the same battalion. So I think it was only this battalion that actually did this. I haven't seen any others. Move on. Next one, Frank. This doesn't come up too well, but this is actually a chaff bag for a horse. They used horses on Gallipoli to take the field guns, take them up the cliff faces and onto various positions. Horses didn't last too long there, But this is a chaff bag which has been folded up and it's been sent back home. And it's the only one I've ever seen. So I don't know what was in it, but certainly it's a very unusual item to go through the postal system. Next one. This doesn't come up well either. However, this is a soldier's handkerchief. So it's been folded up and sent back home. This was posted in England, but from a soldier from the Western Front. So this is a quarter of the size of the handkerchief. And you can imagine if you tried to blow your nose into one of these, it's almost made of khaki and it'd be horrible to use. But this is what it is. And someone sent this handkerchief back home. I'd hate to think how, you look at it and it's so malleable and bendable that how it was survived back home, particularly with the stamps intact on it. So that's one of the things that surprised me all about this item. Next one. This was something I picked up probably 5 or 6 years ago, probably even longer. This is a German water bottle, and the soldier has cut up the German water bottle into a postcard size, and on it, it's actually got postcard written on it, and it's got greetings from the front. And then on the reverse, the soldier has hammered in a message. And then on the top of it, in the top left, you can't see it, but it says Hun water bottle. So this is a German water bottle cut up. The soldier has created the message as well as the illustration on the outside, and it was sent in an envelope, and the envelope was completely wrecked by this thing. I've got the original envelope. It's got so many holes in it. And this has been sent from the Western Front back home. It's the only one I've ever seen. Next one. This doesn't come up well at all. However, I have heard of this before. This is a coconut husk. So someone in, I think it's the New Guinea campaign, has got a coconut and sent it through the post back home during World War II. It's an unusual item. I've read newspaper articles of coconut husks being sent from other places, but this is the only one I've seen available to a collector. So it's very, very fragile. It's falling to bits. It amazes me that it survived all the postal system to get to its address. So this is that's the end of my exhibit. It's novelty and necessity. They're all unusual items, and it's supposed to make people think, why did they send that, or how did they send that? And so hopefully it's achieved its aim of people looking and say, well, that's unusual. Thanks a lot, Frank.
Over to you, John.
And thank you, Gary. That's to say it's unique is probably understating it. The unique's pretty absolute, but a phenomenal range and very, very interesting material. So thank you for all of that. Okay, let's move on. Ian Sadler on the princely state of Jaipur, India. Ian, please.
Well, that's a very hard act to follow, but I'm going to bring you something rather more traditional. I was first introduced about 10 years ago to the stamps of the Indian princely states, the ones that Gibbons gives this horrible name of feudatory states. And I was attracted because of the wide range from simple hand stamps to complicated lithography. Also because the stamps are predominantly in English, and so they're easy to read. However, there are a lot of princely states, and I have narrowed them down to those in Rajasthan. And in particular tonight, I'm showing you the princely state of Jaipur, which you will all have heard of, and indeed many of you may have been to. So my aim is to show the development of philately within the Jaipur Principality, I'm going to call it, from 1904 until 1949, when it became part of Rajasthan in the independent India. what I've done is I've taken the issues of Jaipur in chronological order. I've explored errors, particularly in the 1911 chariot issue, and also the accession of both Maharajas during that period. The postal organization is quite interesting. There were in fact three kinds in Rajasthan, including Jaipur. The first one was the imperial by the British. The second one was the Raj, such as Jaipur, which I'm showing tonight. And the third one was run on the side, as it were, by the local chiefs, the feudatory chiefs. Just briefly as to history, Jaipur is an early 18th century city, built a few kilometers away from the old fort where the kings used to rule, and located in Rajputana to the west of Delhi. It's surrounded by a massive masonry wall, which is painted pink, and hence it leads to its name as the Pink City. On this first slide, I show a palace cover, which has a court seal. If you point to those circular things in the middle, thank you, Frank, those are the court seals. And it's believed to date from 1742. It predates the Jaipur Raj postal system, which started in 1773, and under a contract system which lasted 100 years. And next page, please. Now, this next page shows the very first stamps issued by Jaipur, which are not very commonly known, and they depict the chariot of the sun god. They were printed in July 1904 during the reign of Maharaja Sawai Madho Singh II. They liked their names at length. There were three issues, all lithographed by the Durbar Press in Jaipur, and they are distinguished by the size of the letters, giving the face value in English. Frank, if you can point to the right-hand side of one of the stamps, that's right, that's where those letters on the extreme right-hand side run up, and that's right, they differ between the three issues. That first issue has the smallest length of the word half anna or 1 anna. The very first stamp is interesting. You might think it's been defaced by that cross, a manuscript cross, but in fact that is put on by the sender before his servant takes the letter to the post office, so the servant can't remove the stamp and use it for his own purposes. Coming next down, also on that page, the third line is the second issue with larger letters on the right. And at the bottom, we have a small cover, which I think is addressed in Urdu. You'll see that there's a number of different languages used in this period in Jaipur, and it bears a half anna stamp of issue 2, cancelled by a black seal. Next slide, please. The top line here shows the third issue with even larger letters on the right-hand side of the first issue. If we come down to the second line, and in complete contrast, we have Perkins Bacon recess printed. So we move from these very simple hand stamped to a Perkins Bacon fantastic representation that we're used to. Sorry, I've just lost my place. This now is going to a horizontal version of the chariot with a much more sophisticated result and with no watermark. The bottom three lines on that page show a similar version of the second printing prepared by Wrigley and Perkins Bacon a few years later in 1905 to 08. These stamps are watermarked, but there's only one watermark per sheet, so it's not easy to distinguish them by that means. Next one, please. In 1911, a new naive version of the Chariot was printed in sheets of 6 by the Jaipur State Press, imperforate and without gum. Each stamp is different in each sheet. I'm going to tell you a couple of the varieties, but I won't push them because I don't think you can distinguish them visually the way we've got the presentation. But if you looked at the half and a yellow, the top right-hand stamp in that yellow display has the quarter anna, the quarter inverted. Moving on to the half anna blue, the bottom left-hand stamp has a third instead of a half. I won't go any further because you obviously can't see these, but let me assure you that every one of these has a different stamp. And perhaps importantly, when you get down to the rose and green stamps at the bottom, there are a different number of horses shown in different stamps. So the engraver was being a bit freehand, as you might say. These sheets are believed to be genuine, but please be careful if you're collecting Indian states. There are many non-genuine sheets and stamps around. Next one, please. Now, this is the same issue of the Chariot in 1911, showing many individual varieties and imperforate on thin wove paper. You possibly can see some of the varieties here without taking too long. On the first row on the right-hand stamp, the 16A, the printing is double, so it's been double printed. On the third line down and the two right-hand stamps, there's a much larger J in Jaipur than is normally the case. And finally, on the fourth line, again on the right-hand stamp, we have 1/3 instead of 1/2. I'm not sure who was doing the checking of these, but obviously it got past the keeper. Next one, please. Now we move on to the period 1912 to 1922. We return to better printing of the Chariot by the Jaipur State Press, and this time perforated in 11. And there's a full range from 1/4 anna to 4 annas. It's printed on paper from London, and there are no individual varieties, but there are some imperforate issues recorded. Moving down to the second line from the bottom, in 1926, this issue was surcharged in Hindi. If you could show the overprint on this second line down, please, Frank. Second from the bottom, sorry. That's right. That overprint is in Hindi, and it is to tell us of the accession of the new Maharaja. You may just be able to read this, Maharaja Sawai Man Singh II. Only one name is different, but the third one. But this is a different Maharaja. The bottom stamp, the lowest line, is the final issue of the Chariot design, similar looking to the 1912, many years later, but with perforation 12. Next one, please. We now move to some covers. 3 Jaipur State postcards bearing the arms of the sun god. Frank, if you can point to the top with the god in the middle of the flags, that's right. That's the sun god between two flags, and he has an umbrella to protect him or her from the elements. The top of the three postcards, I think, is in the 1910s because of the Hindi postmark on the printed stamp, and of course the message would be on the reverse. Moving to the middle one, this is an overnight local delivery in November 1938, so much later, and probably readdressed. In this case now, the message is shown on the front rather than on the back. Moving down to the bottom one, this is from Kishangarh, which has its own separate stamps later on, but it's in southeastern Rajasthan, a few kilometers away from Jaipur, and it's sent from Kishangarh to Madhmapur in February 1941. Notice there's been no change in the postcard format over the 30 years. Next one, please. Now we go to a totally different looking series with the investiture of this new Maharaja in 1931. It was celebrated with this professionally produced set, lithographed again by the Indian Security Press in Maharashtra. Full range of values from quarter of anna to 5 rupees, although the issues from 8 annas upwards, really the bottom two lines, are rarely used for postage and are really only available in mint condition. A few designs I'll comment on. On the top row, the second and third stamps, the half anna shows the Maharaja himself. In the second line, the first stamp is a soldier and horse in armor. Bear in mind this is 1930s, not the 15 or 1430s, but in India, of course. Then we move to the 4 anna, that's the right-hand end of the second line, and we see elephants drawing, which I think is a religious shrine, but I'm open to correction on that if somebody knows more about it than I do. Moving down to the 8 anna, this is the third line down, and the middle stamp, this is a very ornate special gate, whose name I won't attempt to pronounce. And then finally, the first stamp on the bottom line is the Amber Palace. This is interesting because that was the home of the rulers of Rajasthan before they formed Jaipur. They lived about 8 or 9 kilometers away in an enormous palace. Some of you may be inside there. They try to get you to go up by elephant, but then they moved and they formed the city of Jaipur. Next slide, please. These are Jaipur covers in the 1930s. The top postcard in 1938 or 9 has the investiture surcharge, which I referred to before, with a quarter anna in Devanagari script. That's the translation of the surcharge, and Devanagari is one of the languages, one of the more ancient languages used in that area. When we go down to the bottom one, this is an interesting cover sent to an oil and dal producer in Jaipur in Rajputana. That's the British name for Rajasthan as we now know it. The date stamp includes the crest. I don't think you can see it very well, but at the top of the date stamp, there is a crest. We'll probably, and the top one, thanks Frank, that shows it better. Thank you very much. Right, moving on, please. Now, this is an interesting cover sent by a salt merchant to Jaipur in August 1942. Note how the stamps are put on the reverse side to seal the envelope, to prevent anybody robbing or looking at the contents. Down below, no, sorry, down below is the address side, of course. Next slide, please. Now, these are some special Jaipur postcards. Actually, one of them's a cover and one of them's a card in the 1940s. Although the top cover bears Jaipur stamps, it is registered in the village of Niwan, which is in the Punjab. So I need more research, because logically, if it was in the Punjab, it wouldn't have been franked with Jaipur stamps. If anyone can help me, or I might have to get the Urdu language translated. Urdu is a language predominantly used by Muslims in this part of India. The bottom cover was sent registered from Jaipur in April 1946. And what is rare about it is the acknowledgement. It's rare to get an acknowledgement still attached to the cover, because the whole idea of the acknowledgement is it was given to the sender as a receipt. So next one, please. Now, starting in 1932, there was a new definitive issue brought out with a portrait of the ruler, of course, and again printed by the Indian Security Press in Nasik, which is in northwest Maharashtra, which, for those of you that are not familiar with the geography, Maharashtra is the state which Mumbai or Bombay sits within. The first set on the top line, which was released in 1932, is inscribed postage and revenue, which presumably means it was used for both purposes. The second set, continuing down, the blocks are blocks of the first set. No, I beg your pardon, they're not. They're blocks of the second. The second set, they just used the inscription postage, and I presume that they were only used for postage, and they were issued later in 1943 to 46. Blocks of 4 are easy to get, but they're quite good looking, I think. Next one, please. Now we move to the mid-1940s, just before independence in August 1947, when the British eventually got out. They should have got out 20 years before, but unfortunately Winston Churchill got in the way. The first postcard is similar to earlier ones from 1910 onwards, but of course the Maharaja's stamp is on the postcard. It was sent to Saragar in May 1945. You'll come across this epithet Gar quite frequently. It means a fort or a fortified house. Moving down to the second and third postcards, they've both been uprated for registration. They're written in Hindi. That, of course, is the common Indian language, or the adopted one, the most popular non-English language. And they were sent to Jaipur city in April 1946, the middle one, and a bit later, October that year, the lower one. Next sheet, please. Now, this sheet shows the last issue of Jaipur before independence and the removal of postal services by the princely states. I have to qualify that statement. There were some later stamps overprinted with Rajasthan, but I haven't found room for these, and they are wider than Jaipur. They're not just Jaipur, the way I'm showing tonight. Now, in 1938, the top left-hand stamp The half anna definitive was overprinted a quarter anna in Devanagari, as I said before, because of a shortage of the higher value. The quarter anna put on a half anna. Now, the right-hand top stamp is very rare because it was the last stamp issued by Jaipur shortly after independence in December 47. This one was issued, and it's rare because, as well as being surcharged as 3 pies, the new Indian currency, it also has a double overprint. It's probably difficult for you watching to see, but the lower imprint is the right way around and the upper one is inverted. Thank you. Now, when we move to the lower stamps, below the second line and the lower lines, this is the final set that was issued in 1947 and 48 to celebrate the Maharaja's 25 years as ruler. Now, I'll just pick out a few of the more important illustrations. In the third line on the left is the old solar observatory, where the Raja in that time, and I think the 18th century, something like 1750, 1770, the Raja did many solar observations, and he used the apparatus like the one shown on the stamp to work out the time of day to within 5 seconds. Very impressive for 270 years ago. To the right of that, what they call the Wind Palace, that's the front view from the street of the harem, where the Raja kept his 12 wives and 350 concubines. They were all kept in Purdah, and according to my calculations, the Raja got about 5 days off in the year. Next slide, please. The last issues of Jaipur on covers is the subject of this slide. The top is a cover sent locally to Jaipur in October 1949. You notice that the emblem on the card or on the cover is elephants rather than the sun god. It's written in Hindi, and it bears this elephant coat of arms. And if you look carefully on the right, just below the stamp, there's a semicircle showing postage due. I haven't checked out exactly how much that was, but that's what that black semicircle represents. Moving to the cover at the bottom, this in fact is an entire that went from Malpura in the Tonk district of Jaipur. I apologize for all these different terms, which may not mean a lot to you, but Jaipur is a very big state. It's comparable with the New South Wales or Yorkshire, or Texas, depending upon your loyalties. It was sent in 1948 or 9. And when the entire is unfolded, it shows the gold colored letter on the right, reduced, of course, and really rather nice. I'm afraid the screen doesn't do justice to it. Next and last slide, please. This last slide is showing covers that originated in a nearby state, that of Gwalior, and were sent to Jaipur. Now, the way it works is Gwalior was ruled by the British, and so it used British stamps, overprinted Gwalior. I should have mentioned earlier that the Jaipur stamps were basically limited to use within the state or to adjacent non-British ruled states. So this top cover was sent, this top letter sorry, I've just lost my thread. Yes, it is a cotton and grain merchant writing in Hindi to Marwar which is in the Jaipur district in May 1933. And these commercial covers I find quite interesting. They give you an idea to the economics and the things that people were doing 80 years ago. At the bottom then, a merchant in Guna, in Gwalior, is writing in Hindi to Nawai in Jaipur about customs duty payable on goods. That's in February 1940. I've tried to give you an overview of the issues by this single princely state from 1904 to 1949. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ian. Right. Second, sorry, following on from that, Harry Lower's exhibit, Harry submitted from Adelaide the 1 penny green letterpress stamps of South Australia. So, Frank, if we can get that first image up, that would be good.
Is it up?
No?
No?
Still Jaipur that I'm seeing.
Okay.
There we are, merry crowd of us. Look at us.
Yeah. How's that?
That is exactly what we're after.
Sorry.
Harry's picked a subject that I think lends itself very effectively to single frame exhibiting. He's picked a particular stamp, the 1 penny green letterpress stamps of South Australia. First printing was 1875, last printing 1895, followed afterwards in 1899 by printings of the same design in red. So a 20-year period, which gives plenty of opportunity for variety. Previously, the stamps of South Australia had been recess printed firstly in London, but then later in Adelaide. The twopence was letterpress produced in 1868, but the penny wasn't issued until 1875. And that's probably because it really was in the main used for the printed matter rate and probably didn't have such a high degree of usage. But the 20-year period was a fascinating time in terms of its perf variations. And what Harry has got on this front page, on the left-hand side in the light green, after the proofs, is a sequence of the various perforations and the varieties thereof that were encountered. And he's done some original research about the perf 10 being originally line, but then being eventually comb. And he then explains some of the interesting perf variations, which I think is actually quite an interesting little sequence. But he's done some original research, and I think the tabulation there of the perforations is a very good entry page. And on the right-hand side in the italics, he emphasizes some of the key issues to draw attention to them. In addition to which, the key items on the various sheets are outlined in blue. So I think that's a very good introductory page. So we move on to the second page. Here we've got proofs. Now, one thing I would say is that even when you see these sheets at full scale, one of the problems of scanning and horizontal lines is you can get, I don't think they're moire patterns, but you can get some distortion. It's not really so clear on this poor image that you're seeing on your screen. But I know that Harry was concerned that the imaging didn't do justice to high quality items like die proofs. And plate proofs that he's showing at the base. But a key one there, I would note, by the way, that the date on that is 1896, which is afterwards. And it's said there that this was specially done for an inspection by the Agent General. So a good combination of die proofs and plate proofs of the design. On the next slide, wide range of colors and shades wide range of shades are encountered on this issue, but the color trials tend to show this even more clearly than the issued stamps. And you've got the yellow green on the left, and you've got the blue green on the right. So very large blocks, which is very, very attractive. But they do, I think, show very effectively the color variation. Next slide then, thank you, Frank. For the first year, 1875, they were printed on paper that was produced by De La Rue. And I should have said at the beginning that these were, the dye was produced by De La Rue in London, and 2 plates were sent out to South Australia for the printing of the stamps. For the first year, De La Rue paper with crown over South Australia, but wide, but that was only used for 1 year. But what makes a particularly interesting feature of this was that the particular perforating, the rotary section of the perf 10, the line perf, could not cover the width of the sheet. So there are a variety of combinations of perforations that are found on the right-hand side of the sheet. So he's showing a range of those from the right-hand side of the sheet, perf 11.5, 12.5 at the top. The middle unused block outlined in blue is an unusually large unused block, so that's key. But that's perf 10, and at the bottom he's then showing compound perfs. But one of the real challenges of this issue are these perf variations. Harry has included the OS overprints contemporaneously with the issued stamps, and I think that's very logical of showing their use of for official purposes at one and the same time. We go on to the next sheet, and what we have here are large blocks, again, either the blue-green at the top or the yellow-green at the bottom. Despite what I've said about the perforations, that these are the complete width of the pane, and there are no perf varieties on them. These are only perf 10 lines. So some way was found to get round their problems. But some of the varieties that we've just shown are evident. If we go on to the next slide, then thank you. And 2 are outlined, and for a very, very good reason. The top cover shows a penny along with a 6pence, paying 7pence. But the cancel you can't see is Williamstown in Victoria. And because of that, those stamps were not accepted by Victoria. And then to the lower left, you see to be paid, due to pay 1 and 2. It's inverted at the bottom left. So that's the double rate. And that was then paid when it arrived in Milan in Italy, 100 centesimi. I don't know how you pronounce that currency, but a very fascinating cover. South Australian stamps, but posted Williamstown in Victoria. The bottom one is going to South Africa. That's got an interesting typo because it says it's going to Cape of Good Hope, spelt with 2 O's, but an interesting combination to make the 11pence rate from a place I've never heard of, White Yarrawawi, and going to South Africa. So that's a fascinating cover, multicolored stamps. Very attractive and a great destination. So 2 of Harry's favorite items, and I can well understand why. So we go on to the next slide then, thank you. Showing blocks here of the OS overprint. The OS at this first part of the time were the block type, the very substantial lettering size, shown on the range of colors, including a deeper green in the middle pair, and then an official usage at the base going to Wellington in South Australia. So interesting combination, but showing the range of colors and the OS overprint. So we go on to the next slide. A halfpenny rate was needed, and the form was that of 6 by 2. So here are the 2 forms shown at the top of the sheet, nice large block. And then a highlighted item at the base, of which the records of the South Australian group show only 3 in existence of that surcharge on cover, or wrapper, more accurately, I beg your pardon. Okay, we move on to the next slide. And what have we got here? We've got a variety with a shorter bar, cancelling the 1 penny. Apparently it was short-lived, so not many of those, but it was said to be transient, but obviously a number of sheets were actually printed. And then what you've got is the first day of issue. The catalogue says the 1st of January 1882 for this cover, but what Harry is showing is one on December the 31st of 81. So he's beaten it by a day. Well done, Harry. A range of officials at the bottom. On the right-hand end is an unlisted variety with the bar at the top of the stamp. Would be very difficult for you to see, but that's an unlisted variety. And then large blocks, of which the strip of 5 at the base, paying 5p rate, is the largest known block. And then the second largest is the block of 4 above it. Okay, moving on to the next slide. Now we get on to compound perf 10, and this is the second watermark. This is the narrow SA version of it, and showing a range of colours and perforations. So Harry has been diligently assembling this range of items and has very attractively shown them on that page. Moving on to the next one. And what we're here, we've got the Perf 10 comb perforator. Now, you won't be able to see this very clearly, but Harry points out that what he calls the land between the perforations, because these Perf 10 comb were smaller holes, was quite large. The fact that it's a comb perf as opposed to the previous line perf is not recognised in the catalogue, and it's something that Harry has discovered in his studies. It lasted only for a couple of years. But the Perf 10 had this difficulty, and there was some complaint about separation. Then there's a couple of usages of the stamp on covers, either one to Victoria and then one to Hamburg. I must say, going to Bismarckstrasse on the second, I thought was quite good, but 1893, one could be reasonably safe and confident of that. But they're showing this comb perforation, which was used in the early 1890s. We go on to the next sheet. What happened, and there at the top are OS overprints, different colors and the like, and no stop varieties. But because of the fact they were difficult to separate, because of the amount of material between the smaller holes, it was decided that they would modify the comb perforator to gauge 15. And the block at the base is this changed gauge per 15. So that seemed like a very sensible response to the whole problem. So we move on to the next slide, where we've got some usages again of the Perf 15, the printed matter rate. The top cover contains only an invoice, and there's a hand stamp to the top left indicating it only included an invoice. Therefore, it got this lower penny rate. And then the second one is an OPSO, public service cover, Adelaide to Sydney, 1895, printed matter only on the base of it. So usages. So we move on to the next one. And what we've got here at the top is a block of 4 again, per 15, but it has a white floor on the forehead. So transient floor, I would assume. Block with then of the officials, but then there was a problem, and at the bottom the comb perforator has again been modified to gauge 13 because the Perf 15 was splitting too easily. So they went from 10 to 15, and they got over that, the problem of the difficulty of separation. They separated too easily, so the compromise was 13, and there is a large block shown at the base of Perf 13 in 1895. So moving on. very interesting cover at the base, but at the top, an item, the hand stamp. This is from the Krishoff collection, which I believe is a very large South Australian collection, and that collector made his manuscript notes as he's done. And what does that say on there? It's very hard to see. Just bear with me one moment. It says 15 plain margin. So I'm not quite sure what all that particularly. Oh, perf 15. No, it's not. It's perf 13. But interesting from a classic collection. Apparently on the perf 13 there are more perf varieties, and he's showing there a range of those perf variations, but none in the earlier perforations, but this perf 13 seemed to get more than its fair share. And then a fascinating item at the bottom, which with private perfin, which you won't be able to see, of course, from D and J, as in Fowler, on a circular only cover going to the USA, with a bulk mailing printed matter rate, and there's a hand stamp, if Frank, in the middle, that's exactly 20 posted, it says on it. So that's interesting. I've never seen anything quite like that of the bulk rate with that sort of marking on it. So a very unusual, good destination, and a very unusual mark. And last but by no means least, and those of you who know me will not be surprised by why I say by no means least, I'm particularly talking about the item at the bottom of the sheet, but the items at the top are the later version of the OS overprint with the varieties no stops after S. But the bottom is got a range of stamps. Additional halfpenny paying the tuppence letter postage rate to Mauritius on a halfpenny official newspaper wrapper. Now, Mr. Edwards, I've got quite a bit of mail to Mr. Edwards because all of the rain reports on Mauritius from around the island were sent to this Mr. Edwards, and knowing now that he's a station agronomist in Mauritius, I'm not surprised that he got the rain reports. But it's a lovely item with 3 official stamps on it. I wonder whether it's a bit of a contrivance, but Harry might be unhappy with my saying that. But Edwards certainly kept all of his mail and may well have been a collector. But I think it's a very attractive item. So I think Harry, by covering that 20 years of usage of this particular stamp, he's shown a great deal from his own research of the perforation varieties, and I think has come up with an extremely good single frame exhibit. So thank you, Harry. Now, last but by no means least is Paula, and we're just hoping, Paula, that your voice is as crystal clear.
Well, I hope that you all can hear me. John can take over because I've sent them my notes. So my exhibit is the diadems, the 5-penny diadems of New South Wales. The diadems were the 3rd series of postage stamps to be issued in New South Wales. Penny was ordered by the New South Wales Treasury in December of 1953 and was intended to pay the current tuppenny inland rate plus the threepenny ship letter rate. But unfortunately, it took so long to release the stamp that they had changed the rates to 6-penny before the stamp was actually issued. The contract for doing the design was given to Perkins Bacon in London. And this is the first time they decided not to do local stamp production all in the colonies, and the London manufacture of the plates, the watermark paper, and the inks would be done. The 5-penny design was larger than the lower values, so the steel recessed printing plates were stamps of 100, 10 by 10 arrangement. And as they were doing the original plate, position 9 across the first row had to be re-entered. So it was burnished out and a new stamp was put in And so you can still see minor indications of a previous stamp being there. That was the only change, and it was made before the plate was hardened. Once the plate was hardened, that single plate went through the entire life of the 5-penny diadem with no changes, no modifications whatsoever. When it was released in December of 1955, it virtually saw no use due to the new 6-penny ship letter rate. So the plate was in continuous use from 1855 all the way through to the last printing in 1912, when it was replaced by the Australian Commonwealth Kangaroo issue in 1913. So that gave the 5-penny diadem an uninterrupted life of 57 years from a single unretouched plate. So I go through all of the different varieties of the stamp, from the different printings to the different watermarks and all the different perforations. Okay, go to the next slide, please. The line engraving for the original die for the central figure of Queen Victoria wearing the diadem crown was engraved by William Humphreys in 1853. And here are a couple die proofs of those central heads. And I also show a photocopy of the stamp that's on the reverse of the one that shows it Perkins Bacon, and it also uses the belt design in the Perkins Bacon hand stamp. The backgrounds were done by machine turning or scrolling, and there were several different experiments that Perkins Bacons did. The particular die proof number 215 is the one that the background for the 5-penny diadems were chosen, little bits and pieces of that die. Other parts of that same die were used for the 1 shilling and other denominations. You can see the different colors that the proofs were done in, the plate proofs. There were 4 different colors that were done, with one being in the original or issued color. The last die proof on that page is an exhibition proof that was pulled for the South Kensington exhibit in 1871. And there are only 3 of these proofs known to be recorded, and this is one of them. Next slide. Let's see. So the first issue of the stamp was an imperforate on watermark 5 paper. So the inks and the paper were all sent from London for printing in New South Wales. The paper was bound into books that had 250 pages. And down the left side of those pages was a scroll work design. And when the page was printed, they'd have to cut it out of the book, print on the page. Half of the scroll work is left on the stub in the book for accountancy purposes, and the other part was on the page that was put into the press. See, there were only 9,800 stamps. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped ahead on my notes, I'm sorry. The initial printing of 5,500 stamps was done in December. All of these stamps were printed in a dull green color on the double line watermark 5 paper. Second printing of 22,900 stamps was made in May of 1858. And out of these stamps, only 8,961 were actually issued to post offices for use, because there was no demand for this particular stamp at that time. And so most of them were held within the printing area. Let's see, there are only 2 covers that are recorded that bear a 5-penny imperf diadem. And the cover that I show here is the only cover recorded with a pair of 5-penny diadems. It's dated the 21st of October, 1863. That's when they finally changed the rate again so that the 5-penny could be used. And the announcement reached Australia in September. And so at that point, the 5-penny diadems started getting used. All right, why don't we go to the next page? Okay. let's see. In 1860, a Perf 12 perforating machine was introduced. And since so few of the diadems had been used or requisitioned out of the post office, they used existing stock and they perforated those as requests came in for stamps. Only 9,800 stamps were perforated 12 and were issued to post offices between 1860 and 1862. The sheets were not perforated between the outer margins and the stamps, which is why in this pair with the burlage there, you can see there's no perforations along the left side of the stamps. See, all recorded date stamps on this particular issue are between 1863 and 64. And the cover that I show here is the earliest cover known to be recorded on the 22nd of September, 1863. And you'll note that this perforated diadem has an earlier cancellation date than the imperf I showed you on the previous page. That's just depends on what post offices had imperfs and which post offices requisitioned the perforated stamps. Okay, why don't we go to the next page? Let's see. I'm losing my place. I'm on page 5. Okay. The perforating machine for Perf 12, which varied between 12.5 and 13, was introduced in March of 1861, and it was used on 5-penny diadems from 1863 to 1870. There were 5 printings of 125,000 stamps between December of 1863 and November of 1870, and there were 4 different color variations of these. The first color is shown here. It's the pale bluish green, was released in December of 1863. And I've shown a number of different pairs and watermark. All these watermarks are upright except the lower right where the watermark is inverted and reversed. Okay, next page. This one is a blue sea green color, and you can see that these are all perforated Perf 13. Let's see. I show one mint with burlage, and the Perf 13s actually did have perforations between the stamp and the margins, and you can see that on that stamp. And they're still very seldom used, so any of the canceled variations are still relatively rare. And the cover I show has a strip of 3. It's actually a pair and a single. And it's posted to Hamburg in Germany. Okay, the next one. Let's see. This one's my favorite page. And the dark blue perforated 13 was released in November of 1870. And the watermarks on a lot of these are inverted and reversed. I'm not really sure why that's the case in this time period. But the block of 20 that I show at the bottom, Perf 13, is a spectacular misprint. I don't know if they dropped the paper on the plate and then had to print it, but it's skewed quite severely. But in spite of that, the person doing the perforations managed to outline the stamps reasonably well. Now, if you look at the back of this block, you'll see that the watermarks are, vastly misplaced because of the skew of the paper. And I would suspect that the ones in the upper right corner, the very last one, may not have a watermark on it at all because of where it was positioned on the piece of paper. Let's go to the next one. At this point, a new dandy roll came along, and it was a crown over New South Wales. And this is the one we refer to as type 1. It's got a rather short crown and is very close to New South Wales. It's only 1 millimeter between the crown and the lettering. And here are some examples from that issue. There are very few of these. I really struggled to even find this many of this particular watermark. And you can see I've got a couple pairs in there as well, but there's just not a lot. The stamps that are on the cover, the vertical pair that's stuck on the stamp sideways, you'll notice that on the right side you have a straight edge, and that's because the paper was designed for the smaller stamps and was cut in half to accommodate the 100 stamp plate for the 5 penny. And some of the stamps get very, very close to the edge, so they didn't perf them. And that's actually the edge of the paper on the top of that stamp that results in that straight edge. Okay, you can go to the next one. This was yet another dandy roll came along. This crown is slightly taller, and there's 2 millimeters between the crown and New South Wales. And it was produced in 3 distinct colors. The first one was called a dull or bronze green. And the perforations were perf 10 and perf 12 by 10. So I've shown some examples of the different perforations and the orientations of the watermarks on this one. Okay. Go to the next one. This is the second color, is called a bright green. This one again is on the watermark New South Wales type 2, but there are a lot more choices here because a perf 11 machine was introduced, and you see combinations of perf 10, perf 12, and perf 11 in this mix. So I've tried to show one of each one in the sequence of all the different types of combinations. The first stamp on the page has what I call a scroll watermark. This paper didn't have a burlage printed down the side of the paper, but it did have a watermark scroll, and this particular stamp was a little too close to that. And what's on this, the watermark on this particular stamp is just a big arc, which is one of the edges of the scroll design that was watermarked down the side of the paper. Okay, the next one. This is another color of that same watermark, the blue-green, and again the perforation. Here I show you down in the lower right an example of that re-entered position, row 1 position, not crack through the O in postage and a little bit through the later part of the word. And then down to the lower left, there are a lot of vertical lines in the margin area next to the stamp, which is all part of the re-entry of that. And there are 2 examples of that particular one on this page. Okay, we can go to the next page. This is the last watermark type for the 5 penny diadem. It's crown over New South Wales. It's the same tall crown and the same NSW, but there's only 1 millimeter between the crown and the New South Wales. And it was printed in dark green. So between 1903 and 1912, more than 2,000 5 penny diadems were produced on this type of paper. Now, if you bear in mind, once Federation happened, all of the other stamps eventually migrated to be on crown over A watermark except for the 5-penny diadem, which contained on the Crown over New South Wales type paper. The example on the cover here is a perfin, and it's from the E. Rich and Company Limited from O'Connell Street in Sydney. And that's one of the few perfins I have in the 5-penny diadem area. Okay, so the next one. Okay, now we get into the OS overprints. In 1880, it was decided that government departments would use overprinted stamps for its correspondence designated by the OS for official service. And because we still had a lot of unused 5-penny diadems that have not been requisitioned by post offices, they pulled existing stamps to overprint OS. So the first ones that came out, and here's a couple large blocks of those and a number of single ones showing the different edges of the paper. The last two show that the stamp was printed at the bottom or the top of the page, which is why it's got a straight edge on it. These are very rarely used. The one example I have here is the block of 4, which is canceled New South Wales. And I have 2 specimens down in the lower left, but most of the OS stamps that you see are going to be mint. Okay, go on to the next one. There were that first one was the watermark New South Wales type 1. This is on New South Wales type 2, and there were 2 colors of that, the dull green and a blue-green color. At the end of 1894, it was decided that they were going to discontinue the OS overprints, and they've decided to use OHMS covers along with the name of the department on it instead of OS stamps. So what they did was recall from all of the departments the stamps that they had, and they were actually burned. The remaining stock by the held by the GPO was supposed to be destroyed, but the collectors and dealers raised such a fuss that they decided, okay, fine, we'll just demonetize them and sell them to dealers and collectors. And that's probably why you see so many of the OS stamps that are in mint condition. Okay, and the next page. These are 2 examples of continued use of 5-penny diadems. And this is the new OHMS envelopes. And there's also a package wrapping there from a book post that was done OHMS that also bears a block of 4 diadems. Now these are the watermark type 2 versions of the stamps. Okay, and the next page. Okay, so they decided to have a big celebration for the Jubilee, the 50th year celebration of the 5-penny diadem stamp, and it coincided with a philatelic exhibition in Australia. They worked with the postmaster's office and got a special cancellation made specifically for the show. And they also had a invitation on this special postcard they produced, inviting people to a conversation about the Jubilee of the 5-penny diadem. And this is one of the invitations that was sent to England and postmarked with the special show cancellation. Now, the stamps continued to be used for another 7 years until they were replaced by the kangaroo, at which time the plate was destroyed. But overall, the life of this 5-penny diadem lasted for 57 years off a single plate with no changes. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. We've got 95% of all of that, so that worked out very well indeed. So thank you for that. Now, all that remains, well, I say not all that remains, but the key thing is for our judges to give a report on their consideration of those 4 items and to announce our winners. So if I could call on Charles Bromser to run us through some comments, please, Charles.
Yes, of course. So we'll start with novelty and necessity. And what I saw was a real cameo of what I'd call postal history, with really eclectic little pieces that bind us into what people do and what people will go into just to get a letter out in a circumstances is beyond their own. So the ingenuity was wonderful. I imagine it's a long period of time that you pick these up, because you won't find them regularly in auctions. You know, it's a very eclectic little group that you have there. And it's really well done in terms of that you tie the Gallipoli to the various philatelic items that people have created in terms of paintings and advertising material. You find very similar stuff with a lot of the propaganda material, which you'll find at the end of World War I and then well into World War II and even in current day. So it was a very nice little group of philatelic items to look at. Then if we look at Jaipur, we see that we're back into the world of traditional philately. This competition had 3 typically traditional exhibits, and one of them was what I call postal history, although the Jaipur is a mixture between postal stationery and traditional, sort of blending together with the similar designs. If we look at Jaipur, from the very first issue to the last issue in the 47s, you can see that we oscillate between local printing, which is very rough and ready, big sheets, little sheets, lots of little errors, to printing presses that work in Mumbai or Bombay. They're able to create the same stamp time and time again with little variation and very beautiful designs, especially the Maharaja sets. So that was a very eclectic group of a single princely state of India, of which there are rather many of them now. Then we go into 2 very similar exhibits, the penny green and the 5-penny diadem, in terms of we've got a single value traced from its early days of being dye-proofed to the last usages of it. And what we see is in those periods where you have 20 to 40 years of printing, that we go through, do we have more perfs, less perfs? Are we going to have the colours bright, not so bright? Basically, we're seeing what really happened in terms of an economy where we depended on printing inks that come from different people, printing papers that come from different people, and then the printer themselves. I don't know why you would get inverted watermarks. Perhaps you got bored and put one upside down just for the sake of doing something different that day. What I like about both of them is the depth of study that we see in both of them in terms of the perfs, the logic that you form from a dye proof, then a first printing, and then people saying, well, we need to change this or we need to change that. And the research behind the study of those diadems, trying to find one that is a type 1, one that is a type 2, especially if you have these usages that went to Europe, went to South Africa. Trying to find that is really a life's work. And so I really like to commend all of the exhibitors today. They really did a good job. The presentations were excellent. And you wanted me to announce the medals as well, didn't you?
Yes, if you would, please, Charles.
Yep. So the penny green letterpress stamps for South Australia, we're giving a bronze to, and the Perkins Bacon 5-penny diadem, we're getting it to silver. I'd like to congratulate both of the winners there.
Hear, hear. Will you all join me if you demute yourself and celebrate and congratulate our winners?
Well done.
Well done. Well done.
Thank you very much. It doesn't really work on Zoom, does it? Anyway, it was a valiant attempt, but I'd particularly like to thank our exhibitors. Great to see 2 from interstate, and Zoom is got one really good thing going for it, is the international and interstate representation, and that's reflected in the contest. So thank you all very much indeed for your participation. I'm not quite sure when we'll get your medals. Just for those who don't know, we don't give gold medals. The rules of our competition are silver is our top medal, and the bronze second level, but there are no gold medals. So, but I think they were very meritorious, all 4 of them, and they were a lot of fun as well, and a lot of variety. Okay, well, we just got some minor admin things, which I shall go through very promptly. Although, no, actually, that's unfair. But if anyone's got any particular comment they would like to make, and this is without notice, they would be very welcome.
No, I'd just like to let everyone know that the competition entries will be on the website no later than Saturday.
Thank you, Alan.
We now see Paula.
And now we see you.
Okay. Any other comments around the table? No. Thank you very much. Well, let's say we just go into some very general admin. Minutes of the previous meeting not been really properly seen, so we'll move on that. We have a new member, or in fact, not a new member. He's actually a returning member, Luca Lavagnino from Italy. His application's been approved by council. Now, something considerably more important is that we're going to have the Bourse on the 18th of September. We hope this is going to be a big event, and Frank's working very hard to give it as high a profile as is possible. We really hope to get a lot of our members and also non-members to come to our premises and see what we have to offer. There will be dealers present, there will be an auction, and there will be a sale table with members' material available for sale. So more of that on later meetings, but 18th of September. A little bit closer to that date, the library afternoon, 26th of June. The daytime meeting is Ian Sadler with few more examples of Rajasthan princely states. So Ian, you're getting rather used to this, I think. The postal history group on the 14th of July. Last meeting, if you may remember, the subject was alcohol. Well, we thought we needed to balance our books, so religion is our next subject. The philatelic meeting on the 15th of July is David Figg on how to collect and exhibit postcards. He will be in Adelaide, and it will be he will be presenting down the line, but we certainly hope to be physically at 303. But those people who would like to attend, we will be advising of a link that you'll be able to actually join the meeting live and participate, even if you can't come to the building. And then on the 29th of July, Mark Desirio, the Queen's Men, gubernatorial Frank stamps, a Zoom meeting, solely a Zoom meeting. So Zoom featuring quite heavily in our agenda of late. It certainly has its uses, and it's just good to see faces from the US, the UK, and interstate. So they're very welcome. I think that's about all. Thank you all for attending. I don't know how many we had, Frank. Did you get?
We had 23. We got 23. I think we had 24 at one stage, so it's not too bad.
Yeah, it's good.
Okay,
Really
well,
good.
I think that's a good attendance,
Yeah.
and say particular thank you for people overseas and interstate for participating. Thank you all, and I hope you've enjoyed your evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Everyone.
Farewell.
See you guys.
Oh, yes,